What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and patch 10.13 is coming, and that means we're going to talk about it here on the bi-weekly patch rundown, and do math when appropriate, and ramble on for long amounts of time when not. So, let's talk about 10.13 having buffs to Gnar, Kog'Maw, Lucian, Nocturne, Nunu, Rakan, Ryze, Vi, and Yorick, and nerfs to Aphelios, Cassiopeia, Callista, Ornn, Syndra, and Yuumi. And so there's some cool stuff here, some stuff that's actually fun to dive into, and other stuff that we'll kind of talk about. So, Aphelios, some pretty small stuff. I just realized right now that I missed this line in text right here. The attack damage growth is going down. As we saw from Varus losing 0.11 attack damage growth, that ended up being, what, like 1.9, almost 2 attack damage. So, you know, not massive, and losing 0.2 attack damage over 17 levels is 3.4 attack damage at level 18. Now, I want to point out that Aphelios has inflated attack damage because, for those who don't play Aphelios, in place of skilling up his Q, W, E, and R, he just simply gets a skill point to spend that he just puts into base stats. For the first 6 levels, it's attack damage, more or less. For the next 6 levels, it's attack speed, and then at the very end, it's lethality. And because you get all 6 points in attack damage very early on, he has inflated attack damage. And even as a level 18 champion, where you would kind of wait for the scaling to catch up with him, he tends to still have inflated attack damage for an 80 carry. Now, that number being 3.4 lower, to memory, gets him pretty close. This does still mean, though, that around levels 9 or 11 or so, he has, again, inflated attack damage for an 80 carry. This will only nerf him by about 1 in that case, so not nearly as impactful there. That said, it still does nerf his attack damage overall. Aphelios is a champion whose most common build is Infinity Edge into Hurricane into Phantom Dancer, so he tends to delay a second attack damage item. A lot of this is because he gets a bunch of free attack damage. It's mathematically more correct to dodge attack damage items when you get so much AD for free. This has a small chance to shape that. What's interesting is, in terms of crit itemization, the items that don't give attack damage, so all the Zeal upgrades, they are not stat efficient in pure offensive stats. None of them are. But they obviously give some other kind of benefit that is useful, right? Rapid Fire can let you attack from a bunch of bonus range. Hurricane gives you extra bolts. Phantom Dancer, the big one, gives you absurd amounts of gold worth of shielding. It's not damage, like DPS efficient, but it is an efficient item. As long as you care about the things it gives you, right? And so by Aphelios getting a bunch of free AD, and, you know, more AD than other AD carries, basically he doesn't actually lose out in raw DPS by going things like Phantom Dancer. Whereas if Xayah did, yes, she has an attack speed steroid. Like, these all aren't exactly apples to apples, or even apples to oranges. They're not exactly the same. They're also not so distinct that you can't you know, compare them at all. Like, Xayah's W is kind of like getting free attack damage in that she does more damage than just sitting there AFK without skill points. So at a certain point, like, well, of course he deserves to have something. He only has 1 button at a time. So this is not really supposed to be a rant on how Aphelios is badly designed, because I don't really think that's true. 200 years, I know. Go ahead and throw them in the comments down below. We'll wait. We good? Okay. But end of the day, I still think this is a good change, right? I like when base stats are consistent, and the differences in the champions are in the actual things you do. That a level 18 Aphelios is always going to have all 6 points in his Q for raw AD. So get the numbers there, right? Just wanted to kind of get that out there. As far as the Chakrams not resetting the duration against epic monsters, that's nice. So now he doesn't, you know, rush down Baron or Drakes as fast. Turret Indicator's not in spectator mode. Cool. Glad about that one. Always nice to see that cleanup happen. And then a lower bonus AD ratio on the R. So this nerf does not affect this nerf at all. But again, we just talked about it. Aphelios gets free bonus attack damage through leveling up his Q. So there is some amount of flat damage down here. The numbers are too small for it to be really worth comparing. Again, worth pointing out that Aphelios goes IE double Zeal upgrades, so his total bonus AD is actually not that high in most cases. And now the amount that he did have, the ratio is more than halved. Well, cut in more, at less than half. So yeah, I mean, less burst damage. I mean, good to see Aphelios nerfs. He's certainly in a pretty decent spot. I did not have any data tables for math because I didn't think there was any. Then I missed this, then it would have been worth doing. Oh, well, it's where we are. Cassiopeia loses to Magic Resist. Turns out she didn't really lose win rate anywhere. She gained a bit of win rate in mid lane. Top and bot ended up being very, very flat, despite losing health and armor outright. The fact that she gained 4 Magic Resist compensated for that in magic damage matchups, but certainly can't compensate in physical damage matchups. But because all games have magic damage, here we are in that spot. Still does surprise me that her win rate did not go down, but this is the world we're in. So she is still a 53% win rate champion in top and bottom lane, and a pretty solid 52% win rate in the mid lane. Now, I want to point out that Cassiopeia is a champion who buys health outright, and thus is a champion who really could have gotten away with like low base health, because you're gonna always go Roa, you're always gonna go Rylays, you're almost always gonna go or I meant to say Leandries, but you're almost always going to go Seraphs and stuff like that as well. So, and obviously the on-demand sustain. So they could have probably went harder in the health scaling and cut that down to make her stop like below 2,000 or something. But end of the day, it doesn't matter all that much. Yeah, her base health is 2,090 for what it's worth, right? At level 18 after the nerfs. 2,090 is quite high. Again, this champion already buys health and such. So yeah, that could have gone further. They could have cut 5 health scaling off instead of 2 MR. But hey, it's not the end of the world, whatever. So she has less non-standard magic resist. But anyway, here is the difference. So here's the magic durability in 10.11, which was 2 patches ago, 10.12, which is currently live as of recording, and then 10.13 is what we're going into. You can see kind of before and after here that she is definitely squishier in the early game. We already know she's weaker against physical damage at all times, right? So she's now weaker against magic damage up until level 7, and then just barely on. Once you get out of the laning phase, she is more durable against magic damage compared to before the changes ever happened. As far as comparing to the previous patch, obviously 2 flat MR is always a nerf, and here is the difference. It's about 1%, right? So there you go. That is 1 to 1.5% is what you get for 2 MR, basically. It's 1.5%. It just slightly rounds down because it's probably like 1.48% at level 1 or something. All right. Small nerf overall. Again, very surprised when it did not go down this last patch. That shocked me because I felt like it was going to be a pretty big deal. But end of the day, yeah, this now ensures that this is holistically an overall nerf to Cassiopeia for certain, compared to 10.11. So that's good stuff. Next up is a buff to Gnar, who's actually not horrible. He's got a pretty solid win rate top lane. He's seeing the occasional game in pro play. And honestly seems like a decent champion. Now, what's interesting is this buff also heavily buffs jungle Gnar, who, by the way, is horrible. I know, like 8 patches ago, Riot went and said, hey, we're going to do some random buffs to top laners and maybe make them jungle viable. Gnar's jungle win rate, just guess Gnar's jungle win rate. Just come up with a 2-digit number, 35%. It is 2 to 1 odds you lose the game by playing jungle Gnar instead of any other champion. That is horrible. And I understand there's not that much more they can necessarily do without doing heavier reworks and whatnot, but even just suggesting that, hey, maybe you should try jungle Gnar, and the champ is complete dog poop, that sits unwell with me. 35% is not somewhere you should have changes land, especially when considering like they actually went and updated the Mordekaiser changes and like went for version 2 and made it a little bit better, so he's like, you know, above 45 or whatever. Gnar is in a pitiful spot. Now this buff is big enough, by the way, that would in fact buff jungle Gnar. This is actually a fairly substantial buff, at least to hop in and of itself. So here is Gnar. This win rate, completely reasonable, 49.7% and 10.12 in solo queue. Now, there's a caveat to all this data from above and below and all this stuff. This is using Lolalytics, Plat Plus solo queue for the patch. Now, one thing to point out is that, generally speaking, the higher elo you are currently in, the higher win rate you are going to have. Generally speaking, this just tends to be true. So we'll start with challenger players, for example. it's very hard for the game to find players good enough to face Jensen. So Jensen tends to win more than he loses. This continues to cascade down, certainly to lower degrees over time, and lower degrees over Elo. But like, for example, if you want to like test this, like go to a site like Lawlytics or UGG, and just like pick top laners with more than like 50,000 games played. Just like get rid of the like really garbage data that doesn't have enough games, and say, hey, show me Diamond Plus or show me Plat Plus, and sort by win rate and count how many champions are above 50%, and it's going to be like 85%, and how many champs are below 50%, and it's going to be like, very, very few. They do the same thing, but do it in silver, or better, bronze or iron, and do the exact same filter, where like how many are above 50 and how many are below 50. What that means is if you're actually measuring win rates, like if you're saying, hey, what is win rates for Riven in Diamond? It's like, well, every Diamond champion has a 1% elevated win rate. So when you call something 52, it's really 51, right? And that is something like a gigantic asterisk. Fill the screen with it to put over the top of public win rate data. That is very, very meaningful. Because yeah, basically you will continue to slightly matchmake down beneath you, and thus win a bit more than average as a result. This tends to be true. Right, gold players tend to fight silver players more than they fight plat players, right? Like this continues to be true. In general, this is a fact. Because keep in mind, it will like, yeah, just that is how that works. With how public data is scraping the games, you can replicate this yourself, and I can stop talking about it now. You can replicate it yourself. Okay, let's move on. Gnar is 49.7, which yes, asterisk is probably a little bit lower in the real world. But as you can see, the attack speed buff is substantially higher. Hop is the ability you max last. This will definitely still be true based on the fact that there's even less reason to rank it up. And the buff lasts for longer. So the buff is twice as good at rank 1 and lasts 33% longer. This is very clearly now quite good. I want to point out, of course, that more than half the point of Hop is simply the movement part of it. So it's not like the entire ability is 2.5 times as good. Just the attack speed part is 2.5 times as good. But here we are in the stats for Gnar. And I want to point out something else, by the way. Gnar has an absurdly high attack speed growth stat. It is the highest I've seen of any champion in the game. That's not like an obvious, like, strange outlier like Senna, because Senna things. Gnar has a 6% attack speed growth stat, which is absurdly high. It means he scales to like 102% bonus attack speed at the end of the game. That is absurdly high. So it is worth pointing out that like the value of an attack speed buff on Gnar is less useful in the late game because he already has so much attack speed. And if he is in a build where he's really using the attack speed well, like maybe he's actually doing a Ruin King build. I know like Gnar used to do some Ruin King Rageblade stuff, or at least Ruin King tank stuff before. Maybe less so now, but you know, still a possibility. He has a ton of attack speed late game, which means he really does have absurd DPS in late game fights. And so the buff of Hop is less useful on Gnar than it is on, let's say, a Kaisa, whose E is only up sometimes. Okay, right, and then has low attack speed otherwise, right? So here is the actual data, right? Here is how many bonus attacks that he wouldn't have gotten otherwise that Hop gives you. And this is really what's worth pointing out with low attack speed, low duration buffs is attack speed. Like, this is why I like attack speed as a stat, by the way, from a design perspective, is attack speed feels really good. It feels really good to attack faster because it is noticeable. It's immediately noticeably different. It's also why I don't like attack speed slows, because it really throws off feel. But attack speed buffs feel really good. I'll bet you didn't know that Gnar's Hop gave you less than half an attack for the vast majority of the game. So when you're like using Hop to jungle clear and your, base attack damage after Machete is like 70, this is 40 damage. I mean, it's not nothing. 40 damage for a rank 1 ability is not unheard of, though it is a bit low. But now you get a full 1 extra bonus attack as long as you're able to completely solidly fire, which is obviously pretty meaningful, right? That's, you know, what do we say, 70 damage, right? Yeah, that's quite nice. My math was wrong earlier. 0.4 times 7 is like 28. That's garbage. That's garbage. Obviously, if you trigger hyper, it's better, right? Like if you get the W to trigger, then suddenly you're really happy and okay, there's more damage there. And just getting that auto off is obviously relevant. But yeah, getting a full extra attack out off of using Hop is definitely meaningful. It basically turns Hop into an attack reset. It's actually better than an attack reset. An attack reset doesn't give you a full extra attack because you still have to do the new windup. The Hop now gives you more attack speed than a full attack reset. That is quite good. That is quite nice. Right, Nar wants things that are better than attack resets because he wants to get the W off as soon as possible and then end the trade or keep chasing. Who cares? You can keep going. Yeah, this is quite nice. This will be felt. That said, again, this is not a 250% buff to the ability. It is 250% buff to one small part of the ability. At the end of the day, it still means that Nar gets 0.6 more auto attacks every time he presses Hop. That is not a lot of extra power. But it's there, right? I want to point out, like, for example, a Syndra Q doing 10 more damage is... It's less than 0.6 spells, right? It's like 1/10... It's less than 1/10 of a spell. It's 1/20th of a spell. It's 1/30th of a spell. Every time you press Q, and a 10 damage buff to a Q is really good. This is 60% of an attack. It's certainly got a longer cooldown. Like, there's more things going on here, but I don't want to undersell this buff. If you're able to use it, this is a very big buff. Callista loses some attack damage growth. She is a top 3 AD carry in pro play right now. She is pretty much only a bot laner. Her win rate's actually totally acceptable. Interestingly enough, exact same win rate as Nar. I am pretty confident that these are both accurate numbers and not a copy-paste error. Because I actually just overwrite the entire top column when I type in the name so that it wouldn't have been carried over unless I did something really stupid. But yeah, this is another champion who realistically is not terribly overtuned, but is something that is somewhat sought after in pro. So here's her base AD before and after, and loses a solid 6% of her attack damage by the end of the game. Her builds tend to be pretty attack speed focused, right? It's Ruin King, Hurricane, Rage Blade, so her raw AD isn't that high, which tends to make this a bigger deal. Rend and Pierce are total AD ratios, so these affect her actual spell base damage. This can certainly be really, really meaningful. Absolutely the case. Like, really can be a very meaningful hit here to her damage output. Other thing I want to point out is that Callista still has that unfortunate passive where her attack damage on hit only deals 90% of her total AD, which means if we were to convert that into real world terms like she's Xayah or Caitlyn, what is her essential, like, not for attack damage, like attack damage ratios on her abilities, because that still feeds into the full number, but if she's just auto attacking you straight up without spells, what is her essential, like, real attack damage? And it's between 62 and 116, which, by the way, is still quite high, right? Callista got this, like, 10%, you know, on hit damage nerf thing, and her AD is a little bit on the high side. This is not absurd. This is just, you know, the top quartile. It's a little high, but that can be okay. But yeah, this is part of why she gets to build raw attack speed, is she also has, even after converting for everything else, a bit inflated base stats. Either way, yeah, I mean, pretty small nerf. This matters. As with most things, like, almost every change is aimed at about 1% win rate difference. This is probably about accurate here as well. This is probably not going to kick Callista off pro play, realistically. It's not. I'm also not sure you even show up here for the predictions, so who knows. Next up, Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw is getting a 40% bump to the Q and R AP ratios. Notably, this is not affecting AP Kog'Maw's wave clear. The E is unchanged, but the skill shots... Now, to be fair, the R is part of the wave clear. You definitely are minion waves a fair bit of the time, but AP Cog getting big buffs. That's cool. I like that. AP Cog's a fun champion. As long as he's not overtuned, I think he's really fun to play. I tend to enjoy artillery champions, so it's cool to see this guy. Really want to point out this does not heavily affect its landing phase almost at all. I mean, sometimes you have to queue for last hitting, and the fact that it does, an extra 3 damage because you have a Doran's Ring is not completely nothing. But yeah, it's nice. I like this. I'm glad there's AP cog buffs. Technically, this does buff attack damage cog buff because you always go Rage Blade. With 25 ability power on a Rage Blade, that is 5 damage on Q and 2.5 damage on the R before it gets multiplied out. It technically exists. It is not very big. It is not noticeable. It should not affect AD Cog's win rate. I will say there's 2 things that might happen here. One, the most likely, is that we see Kog'Maw's overall win rate decline because more players are going to experiment with AP and will be bad at it. That's probably going to happen from player behavior perspective. The other thing that is possible, although I'm not sure it's likely, but it might happen, is we go into more of a situation that we're at with Kai'Sa, where Kai'Sa does Manamune into Rage Blade, into usually just sticks with AP Kai'Sa, right? It's Nashor's into, oftentimes we see Deathcap or Zhonya's or Banshee's Veil, and then they'll build, there's usually, I think, enough room for 1 more AP item, and this year going QSS or Guardian Angel. So, we might see that shift with Kog'Maw. Like, I would not be completely shocked to see Nashor's be like the 3rd item of this champion, because it's actually not that bad. There is a chance that we see kind of in a month or so from now that there's some Kog'Maw build innovation and people figure that out. I know like 3 years ago, data showed us that on hit Varus was the best Varus build. You should rush Rage Blade, and it was like absurdly stronger than the build that people were doing right then. And then people realized, like, oh yeah, Rage Blade is really good. We should play that item now. And so that sometimes takes time, but public data tends to be really good at sussing out underappreciated builds. Bruiser Shyvana, by the way, one of them. It's better than AP Shyvana. I'm right about this. This might happen here for Kog'Maw. Next up, small Lucian buffs to compensate for the fact that, yeah, the other AD carry buffs were better. So 100 more range on the pierce through of Q. It is not the target range. You still have to find something close to you to hit, but it will hit cast minions in the back a bit more reliably. It'll hit the enemy champions in the back more reliably. In my experience playing Lucian over the last patch, this is going to be felt quite a lot. It felt like there were a lot of times where I would almost land Q on them. Now, it might have been that they were really smart and simply knew my Q range and were playing around that. It would simply play more intelligently further around that. But it did feel a bit short to me, where I felt like I was really, like, it's like, ooh, but I lined it up so well. I got a last hit, and man, I really would have liked the 100 range. So this is going to be pretty meaningful. I know Lucian's win rate is not amazing. It's definitely sub 50. I think it's like, I want to say it's like 48% or something around there. Which means he definitely has room to go up. We're not really seeing Lucian anywhere in pro play right now. Good to see it. Nocturne gets a bug fix where sometimes it wouldn't refund 1 or 2 based on the target. And then, hey, by the way, basic attacks against enemy champions and monsters now count as 2 seconds. So jungle Nocturne buffs, because obviously you now get the reset against jungle monsters. This is both a sustain buff and a clear speed buff, and a clear speed buff is also a sustain buff. This is a very big deal. Nocturne wants to farm fast, wants to get to 6 as fast as possible. This is a really, really big deal. This absolutely matters. This is going to, I could have mathed this out, I realize in retrospect. This wouldn't have been that hard to do. But this is going to be about a 30% increase in number of passives during most of your jungling. Once you learn W, it's a bit closer to maybe 40%. To be fair, most of your jungling is not without W. So the first camp, and then the second camp onwards, it's yeah, quite a bit better. So keep in mind that if Nocturne were to attack once per second, and let's say it would take, we can actually just kind of do this. We can just do this for a little bit, right? Let's take a very long duration timer. Let's say we have 30 seconds between passives, just to make the math easy. You have 30 seconds between passives. That's the cooldown, and you get 1 second off per auto attack, and you attack once per second. Instead of it being, slash, and that's 30 seconds, slash, you attack 15 times, and now it's 15 seconds, so it's slash, 15 slash. So by it not existing to existing, and you attack once per second, that is going from 30 to 15. if your attack rate is still 1.0, it's still a 30-second cooldown, but you get 2 seconds off the cooldown. Instead of it taking 15 seconds, it takes 10 seconds, right? Because if you attack 10 times, it's been 10 seconds, and you got 20 off the cooldown, that's the cooldown is back. So going from 1 to 2 on the refund, right? Literally doubling the refund takes from a 15-second cooldown to a 10-second cooldown, which is a use rate increase of 50%? Should be 50% more, right? Because you're getting 2/3 off the cooldown, which is 50% more usage. Now, generally speaking, no matter where those numbers really are, going from 1 to 2 is still that, right? We still have a 50% increase in number of passives used by doubling this cooldown, but that is once you're at 1.0 attacks per second. That requires about 70% bonus attack speed. Okay, more like 65% bonus attack speed, but that is not what Nocturne has at level 1, right? So we're going back to it's really 30 to 40% more usage of the passive until you get to, your first attack speed item or your level 18 with max rank W, something around there, right? So my kind of brain math was correct, that we did it all out verbally, and I was right, so go me. This is about a 30 to 40% increase in number of passives, assuming you are chain autoing a camp. Good stuff. All right. Yeah. To clarify, really big deal for Jungle Nocturne. Well over 1%, probably maybe 2%. 2% seems maybe high. Not sure it is, though. Very big buff. Nunu gets some really substantial AP ratio buffs. What's kind of amazing to me, by the way, of just what's happening, almost every champion that my Clash team plays is getting buffed this patch. There's Vi buffs down there as well, which is next up for us. But it's interesting for me because my friend loves to play AP Nunu, and AP Nunu is in a better spot now, which is cool. So 15% AP, or 0.15, which is a 30% bump to the consumes damage ratio. 2/7 is 28% bump, so basically 30% bump to the healing ratios, to answer for the damage ratio going up. Absolute value now has absolute value, kind of. Absolute zero has way more value on the AP ratio, 1.5 shield ratio on the R. That is great. This is cool. I think AP Nunu is a cool archetype. I always want it to be supported. I don't want the AP Nunu where he just clicks Snowball on you and consumes a minion and stays full health, and XD has infinite mana. There's better gameplay out there now that the Snowball is a skill shot. It's a lot healthier, but man, that was an abusive top laner before. But AP Nunu is something that I enjoy. I don't really play it, but I enjoy it existing, so I'm really happy this is out there. AP Nunu is probably still a troll build slightly, but still happy about it. Good change to Ornn. Quite nice here. Quite nice. Ornn now keeps his percent health and percent mana when crafting items and joining them. So if you chunk Ornn to 50% and he builds a ruby crystal by going, he only gets 75 health instead of 150. That is definitely a bit meaningful. Absolutely matters. Absolutely matters. Absolutely matters. So good to see that happen. Very happy about that one. This has already existed for a very long time in level ups. I mean, like 6 years or so. Although the level up one, basically, it split the difference between current health and 100%. And so if you were at, let's say, 1% HP, you would gain half your health, your level up health in current HP. So you would still gain something. You wouldn't just keep your exact percentage there. But yeah, Riot has already done things to like try to peg sustain down a little bit systemically. I'm glad Ornn is somewhat keeping up with the times. I think it's a good thing. Just design-wise overall. I think this is actually just healthy for the game. Even if we get to a world where Ornn is eventually underpowered, which we'll get to eventually, I would want to keep this. I think it's just a good change. Rakan is an interesting one because I don't know about pro play specifically, but in solo queue, the higher win rate build by far is Q max into E max. It is leaving W for last. However, his most common build by far is W max first. Now, Rakan's win rate is just fine, right? 50.6%, totally reasonable. And if you are doing the effective skill order, it's far higher. Rakan, realistically, in my opinion, does not seem to need buffs. That said, again, Plat plus solo queue win rates are slightly inflated, so maybe he is slightly weak for the average player because they are skilling him incorrectly. Now, that said, overall, I am still very happy to have a situation where an underperforming skill order is getting buffed. I like that a lot. I especially like it for supports who never hit level 14 anyway. I went and looked for fun. I want you to tell me what you expect a level 15 Rakan's win rate to be. Now, what this means is, what is the win rate of a game where Rakan managed to get to level 15, right? If he's 50% normally, how many games does he win when he gets 15? 75%. If you are getting to put points in your third ability, you have probably already won because you're snowballing really hard, just waiting to kill the Nexus. Yes, some games go to 80 minutes and both teams are level 18 in every champion. That's, you know, part of that other 25%. But yeah, the vast majority of games where there's more going on here. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but just, you know, stick with me here. The majority of games where a support gets to put points in their last ability have already been won. It's already over at that point. When you're winning to 75%, just because you got to level 15, it's usually because you're snowballing, right? The Rakan who's getting clapped is losing and getting to level 7 and forfeiting, which means for Rakan to be a balanced champion, because not every game is a level 7 forfeit, those mid games where you're ahead are, you know, 75%. Okay, I don't need to explain that really very much. But what this comes down to is it's not really a buff for a properly played Rakan, which is fine because properly played Rakan is very, very powerful. Improperly played Rakan is a bit stronger, and that's fine. Like, I think this is great. I actually really, really, really like this, again, because it does not affect the champion in most situations. It only helps underperforming players who aren't sure what they need to skill up. And what's even better is if we do get to a world where Qmax, Emax, and Wmax are all close in power level, because right now they're not. If they are all close in power level at a certain point, that means that you now have choices to make. Because right now, your only choice really is 3 points in Q at the very least, maybe make a decision from there, maybe go to shield, but you're going to leave W for the end because the damage on the W doesn't matter. If you can actually make a real decision about, like, actually, no, this is a game where I should max W, that is good. That increases player agency, that allows players to feel smart. It allows players to make mistakes, but they're at least informed mistakes. They're not just always wrong. That was just a judgment call. Always a huge, huge fan of seeing things like this. I know there's some designers who have, like, when they've, like, pitched their buffs, will sometimes have, like, big internal context sentences where they're like, hey, you know, this is like the pick rate, like, this ability is maxed first 80% of the time, but the win rate's really higher on this ability, so, like, we can just do this and it's going to be fine. Like, I know, like, some of the designers will, like, pour into that data and try to find that kind of stuff out and make, you know, good decisions there. I would love to have a patch where it's just like, we found 50 champions who maxed the wrong ability first, so here's some level up incentive to, like, make it less bad. I would super love that patch. I think that'd be really exciting to me. We'll talk more about that in a second because we're gonna go to Vi, like, I think next. Not next, but soon. So Ryze gets 2 MR and 2 attack damage. Ryze is, because I found more public data, I'm going to bring this one up as well. Okay, in games where it's a forfeit at 15 or a forfeit at 20. Okay, so let me try to space this out the right way. A certain percentage of games that have Ryze in them are FF at 15 or FF at 20, right? That people got clapped in lane and the game is over. Of Ryze games that are FF 15 and FF 20, what percentage of the time is Ryze on the losing team, right? So of games where a team got slapped and had to surrender right away, and chose to surrender right away, so there are some biases, right? They chose to surrender right away, as well as getting clapped enough to surrender. What percentage of those games, of Ryze games, that are surrenders at 15 and 20, is Ryze on the losing team? In other words, what is Ryze's win rate in a 15 or 20-minute game? But the reason I asked it the other way was because Ryze is kind of a factor in the game being a 15 or 20-minute surrender, right? Because the average champion, if they didn't have an impact on the early game, above or below normal, like, the win rate would be flat, but Ryze has shape to his, right? giving you enough time, Ryze is a 40% win rate champion at 15 and 20 minutes. And his overall win rate, by the way, is actually like 47.5. Like, so 47.4 for top and 46.8 for mid. So, you know, not terribly high, right? He is, you know, below average for solo queue, but a 6 to 7% win rate drop. It's biased data. Like it's a little bit weird to dive into, but essentially, it's not, you know, X% of Ryze games are surrendered at, you know, 14 minutes, but that Ryze's early game is so bad that his win rate at 15-20 is down here and then immediately stabilizes for the rest of the game. And that's actually really interesting because then it lets you say, oh, okay, yeah, Ryze's early game is very bad. He could use early game buffs. So he gets 2 MR and 2 AD. Now, we talked about this in the last rundown with Cassiopeia. 2 MR tends to be very, very flat. MR doesn't grow very much, obviously. And even going, you know, and just, yeah. 2 MR is a 1.5% durability bump against magic damage. He is worse in mid lane than he is in top lane. Right, the first number is top, the second number is mid. Mid lane tends to be magic damage heavy. When Cassiopeia gained MR durability, she tended to rise in mid lane and flattened everywhere else. So, yeah, this will probably bump Ryze mid a little bit. So 2 MR, yep, kind of nice. Base AD flat 2 is a great early game buff, right? And you can see, like, we're kind of encroaching a little bit closer to 60. And, you know, Callista, we talked about a little bit earlier, Callista's real attack damage is 62. At level 1. Right, I think it's reasonable to like go up to 16, it's fine. But yeah, Ryze has some quite good baseline durability, some quite good baseline auto attack damage. It is an early game buff to Ryze. As per usual, I think designers tend to aim at 1 to 2%. This buff here, by the way, tends to not be as meaningful for pro play as it is for generic solo queue, because pros are good at last hitting already, especially with Ryze's spells. Your generic solo queue player probably has to auto attack minions more and hope they get last hits with auto attack damage. And so the more you raise Ryze's AD, the better off he is. I think that's great. I'm totally happy about that. I think it makes total sense to do. Wouldn't mind seeing more mages get raw attack damage gains, especially when they have very difficult growth curves, because at least you can auto attack, right? I think that is an interesting way to try to, if you were looking to flatten out growth curves at all, or like skill curves, base AD level 1 is a decent way of doing it because everyone can auto attack. Interesting lever, right? Like, I don't think you need to template champions level 1 attack damage. I would like if all mages had about the same level 18 attack damage. That, like, you could just shift their level 1 AD up and down as needed for, like, interesting lane tuning. But, like, yeah, but all mages end at 105. Or, actually, to be honest, I just like a flat 100, right? Like, Ryze could just have 0.5 less attack damage growth and start at 62 or something. It's a really random thing. It's not terribly important. Like, there's never really a reason to, like, have a patch note, which is we nerfed Ryze's bonus AD, like, his bonus AD scaling by 0.05. Why? Or his AD scaling, I should say, just overall, or growth. It's not actually important, but just, you know, if I could rebuild the game and, like, keep all the champions, but, like, hold on, I get to just manipulate all the numbers. I have to rewrite them all by hand. I would do that. I would just have every, like, non-AD champion end at 100. Just, like, no... I guess every range one. Tank maybe go to, like, 115. Really minor thing. Not gameplay impactful at all. Not worth the designer's time to fix. It's not even a fix, really, to change. It's just there to be there. Let's move on. Syndra gets 20 mana cost increase on her Q, scaling down to the same cost. Overall, 49.3 win rate mid laner, 50% win rate bot laner. Again, win rates in plat are elevated. Syndra is objectively underpowered in solo queue. She is. She is objectively underpowered in solo queue. Riot is attempting to do pro play focused nerfs. This is the same thing that happened with Lissandra a while back, where heavy nerfs to Lissandra's Q mana cost were required to get her out of pro play, and then they then rebuffed Lissandra in other ways. I think her win rate is pretty acceptable, but she's still not running around pro play when she was like 80% pick ban. So weirdly, even though pros are very good at managing mana, auto pushing waves is a really, really big deal for just pro in general, and here we are. Obviously quite substantial. I think 40 mana was definitely too low for this ability. In general, very old League of Legends, like 2009, 2010, abilities tended to double in cost and triple in damage across rank up. It was so much that I was like, oh, this is just how like League designs their champions, is costs double and damage triples. And that's just how it is. That's just how they scale their abilities. Dark Binding did this. Tormented Soil did this. I was a big Morgana player back in like early release. I don't remember every other ability, but like I know for Morgana it was true for like almost every single ability. I mean, ults used to scale from 1 to 200 mana as well for similar reasons, and the cooldowns tended to roughly halve over the course of time. I think it's much more acceptable and much more correct, by the way, for mana cost to go roughly up by like 33 to 50%. And some are like flat, and that's fine too. But you almost never see a mana cost double. If mana cost doubles, it probably means the first rank mana cost is too high, or sorry, too low. Yeah, basically. But also they don't grow much at all. It means that there's probably not a good enough scaling. So, you know, a solid 1/3 increase, I think, is a pretty reasonable mana cost increase. I think that's actually like about the design space these mana costs should have for most champions. And we'll get into some more of that in a second because there's stuff going on. Here is the Vi buff. Vi gets 1 second off her cooldown. Well, half second with the cooldown every rank up, 2 seconds off at max rank, 1 second every 2 points. I don't know why I did it that way. Half second per rank up. Here's the Q cooldown, the cooldown, before and after. The cooldown goes from 12 to 8 and now is 12 to 6. That is actually pretty nice. Q is indeed what you max first. As we can see, Vi, decent win rate. Again, with the slight plat inflation, she is basically 50-50 champion. You know, didn't need buffs, but isn't going to be breaking the game if she gets them. So that's fine. You'd have to max this first. A few people max W or E first. They are unpopular and also wrong. Vi, like a million other champions, occasionally has weird skill orders from players who are bad at the champion. Doesn't matter. You max Q first. Yeah, we're good. Okay, shorter leash range on Yorick's ultimate so that she follows him around a bit more reliably when he goes to leave and go somewhere else. We suspect this will be a small amount of power that skews towards upper echelon of pro play where Yorick is currently weak. So, yep, him saying, yep, it's time to leave. Let's pull the maiden back. We're not going to win the fight. Let's not have her die. I don't want to lose the cooldown. Maybe we recall or something. Yeah, I mean, that I can see that, right? That could be nice. It's pretty small. I don't have a lot to say about this one. Seems decent. But now we have the Yuumi change. So Yuumi indeed had, I think, a pretty reasonable mana cost scaling, right? 60% increase in mana cost is, I think, well within margin. I think that's totally okay. But now has a really, really interesting mana cost. So technically, it only ever gains 50% mana cost on rank up, and that's not even really true. It's actually much lower than that. But this thing now has a max mana cost attached to it. And oh my, is that a big deal. So a couple things to point out, by the way. This cost lies to you. So Yuumi has an absurdly large mana pool. 400 mana at level 1 is on the high side. She has very high mana growth where she goes to, I think, like 1160 mana at level 18. So Yuumi generally has a very large amount of mana. She also has a very, very, very large amount of mana regen. Her base mana regen is 2 mana per second. I don't think there's another champion with that much mana regen. I could actually like research it, but Yuumi has legitimately very inflated mana. Now, what's interesting is I want to kind of take some time to dissect mana cost and mana pools, because the more base mana and mana cost you have, the less receptive you are to buying mana. So imagine a world where Yuumi has 4,000 base mana, and the E cost is 1,000 mana, and her base mana regen is 20 mana per second. Right? If all you're buying is percent mana regen, nothing is different, right? You just happen to have really, really absurd mana costs. If you get blue buff, it's the exact same champion. Nothing is different. Nothing is different at all. But if you buy a sapphire crystal, it's 1/10 as good, right? It's 1/10 as good to have a sapphire crystal, because I'm only getting 250 mana or whatever, and that only covers 1/4 of my E cost instead of 2.5 E costs. So if you want a champion to not be receptive to mana purchases, you inflate their stats. And this is why consistency can be a bad thing, is it would remove that lever to say, well, no, Yuumi is going to have inflated base mana and inflated mana costs so that you can't circumvent her mana cost by buying mana. As we found out, people go Presence of Mind and Mana Flow Band, and well, they circumvent the mana cost anyway. I want to point out, by the way, like Yuumi's base mana regen takes 50 seconds to pay for Zoomies again. That is pretty expensive. Black Shield is not nearly that prohibitive, right? The fact that Yuumi gets to pay for a new heal once a minute before Spell Thieves, that obviously modifies things, is one of the more prohibitive mana costs. She can only cast that ability 4 times before being That's a fairly prohibitive mana cost. We look over at, the new Syndra. Yeah, how many Dark Spheres is that? Like 8? Probably has like 320-ish base mana. Now, you're going to cast Dark Sphere 8 times in the time that Yuumi casts Heal 4? Yeah, maybe, right? And then you have to start thinking about cooldowns, and there's a lot more depth that goes on here, right? Yuumi can heal purely reactively, right? She can wait till her teammate takes damage. Syndra needs to press Q to push the lane and fight back and other stuff. Yuumi can use her other abilities proactively, like Q to poke and do other stuff. So it's not a complete one-to-one, right? But these are the kind of things you have to really consider when you're thinking about, okay, mana costs and mana pools and mana, regen and whatnot. Is Yuumi has a lot of inflated stats to allow Zoomies to be a really big part of the budget. That can be a well-built, all-encompassing, tuning device, and that's totally fine. Worth pointing out, end of the day, stacking flat mana was still too good, and Presence of Mind and Mana Flow Band was still way too much. So instead, there is a max mana cost on Yuumi's E. And oh man, does that do a lot. So Yuumi is technically a pretty balanced champion. 50% win rate in solo queue. I didn't look too heavily into whether or not this was because of bad skill orders. Emax seems to be the appropriate skill where like maybe put 2 points of Q, maybe a third, but probably not. And then in you go, max out E by level 9. So here's the cost before, right? 100 to 160. Here is the cost after at a 15% max mana increase. And this is, by the way, the most generous version possible where you are, in fact, maxing E first. If you're not maxing E first, it's worse because this keeps happening to you and this didn't. So this really, really screws over builds that didn't max E first. Builds that do still get hit really hard. This is a substantial nerf. This is a substantial nerf, and we haven't even gotten to the bad part yet. This is a substantial nerf. Here it is with Mana Flow Band and Presence of Mind stacked up. Now, obviously, you are not getting all 5 stacks of mana, or 10 stacks of Mana Flow Band and all 5 stacks of Presence of Mind at level 1. Like, yeah, you might have an absurd level 1 where you get 500 max mana because of Presence of Mind. Okay, yeah, sure, but like Presence of Mind is going to, or Mana Flow Band is going to take you a while. Let's choose level 9. Let's choose level 9 as the real example. Because before, in the first levels it was fine. Like, this doesn't affect Yuumi's laning phase, right? Yuumi is fine in the laning phase. If you're not stacking Mana Flow Band often, if you're not stacking Presence of Mind, if you're maxing E first, this is barely a nerf. This is really, I gotta give kudos to the designer, a very well-tuned set of numbers. This couldn't have been much better. I'm a huge fan of this one. Yeah, you could have done like 14% max mana and it would have been like a little close. No, this is great. Super fan of this tuning, right? Early Yuumi laning is basically unaffected. To be really clear, early Yuumi laning is basically unaffected. And that's fine. Like, again, I don't really think Yuumi is terribly overpowered. I really don't. The win rate seems fine. Yeah, she can be frustrating to play against, but by Executioners and crowd control the AD carry, it's fine. I really think it's okay. This obviously kicks off a lot more, though, in the end game, even if you weren't mana stacking. And in fact, you might choose, by the way, to kick off the Mana Flow Band and the Presence of Mind and just forsake it all, and you will still see this nerf to Yuumi. Now, again, a level 18 Yuumi is not likely. It is not realistic. Level 13 is probably where you stop at, even in, some of the more extreme cases, and it is still a pretty meaningful nerf to the mana cost. Now, I gotta say, though, a level 13 Yuumi has like 700 max mana and can handle this, right? In fact, we can, deduce it pretty easily. Her max mana is 893. at level 13. So she has 900 max mana without items at this point in time. Does a 30 mana cost really hurt you much? No, not really, right? So even though it is a 20% increased mana cost, you're not usually ooming on supports in the late game anymore. But this champion indeed has 1,165 mana at level 18. And if you add 750 to that, you know, if you're around here and you have stacked mana flow and you have stacked presence of mind, your mana costs are more like doubled. This is obviously really, 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 really a big deal. Right? This is going to be very substantial. Yuumi will run out of mana in these fights as a result. Now, it's funny. I want to point out that technically, Mana Flow Band and Presence of Mind are still useful, right? Because even though it still costs some percent of max mana, you still have this flat cost as well that you still have to compensate for in some way. Yes, her base mana is very high and covers this pretty well, but this still exists. So you are still getting benefit out of Presence of Mind and Mana Flow Band. And so I want to point out that even when we say, hey, is 30 mana going to really break the bank? Well, that is directionally still as accurate as is 140 mana going to break the bank. Because you are still getting a similar number of spell casts in either case, right? Like, this is the exact same number of casts, arguably, and so is that. I'm not sure I'm making full sense here. What I'm saying is, this nerf is... yeah, I mean, okay, it is a bigger nerf to Mana Flow Band builds, obviously. And by going Mana Flow Band, you, by definition, have more casts than before. Which means if this nerf wasn't going... like, if you weren't going to without Mana Flow Band, you're not going to with Mana Flow Band, right? Like, you're not... like, yes, the nerf is bigger, but the number of spell casts still goes up by getting these talents, by getting these runes. So if this wasn't going to you, then this by definition won't you as well. We finally got to the point I was trying to say and I couldn't get the words out for it. That's what I'm meaning. That said, it is still a bigger nerf to her most popular build, her most successful build, which is Mana Flow Band and Presence of Mind. It is likely still correct, although the amount of power that grants is lower, which means we might see that happen less. But I mean, Cut Down is great. She has less health than every other champion in the game. She still wants a bunch of mana sustain. There's no better way to get it than those runes. This may still be the build, and she may just lose a crap ton of win rate. And that's just the way it is. There's a really good chance Yuumi disappears from the game as a result of this nerf. I think that's true. We'll see, though. It took a lot of time to say not that many things. Sorry about that one. Conqueror is now a 12 stack and gains a little bit less adaptive force per stack. There's two things with Conqueror, right? So one, you just get less stats until you max stack it. You get about 15% less stats. You get 1 to 2% more stats if you can get up the way to 12. Whatever, yes, if you can eventually get there, sure. But, I mean, as a consequence of you have to hit your opponent to get the stacks, Conqueror is always weaker. In addition to that, a full stacked Conqueror gives you Omnivamp, right? It gives you an 8% heal on damage to champions. That comes online one auto attack later. Thus, not only are you dealing less damage, you're also healing less health. Conqueror is pretty meaningfully nerfed. What's interesting is this is basically... Let's come up with some example scenarios. Let's say you're a melee champion who always lands 2 spells. That means instead of taking you 3 autos, it takes you 4 autos. There's a 25% nerf to your stacking speed. Let's say you're an AD carry who always lands 2 spells. Instead of landing 6 autos, it requires 8 autos. That is still a... what did I say? A 1/3 increase in number of autos required. That doesn't actually change. Which I find kind of interesting, right? If you could land... I mean, What's interesting though is it's a nerf of 33% more autos required, but requiring three autos becoming 4, I would say it's still different from 6 autos requiring 8, right? You're still extending the low buff time for longer on ranged champions, and thus it still feels like a nerf that is bigger for ranged champions than melee ones. I think that's true. Because fights don't last infinite amounts of time, they last a finite amount of seconds, and so in the context of how much of a fight is under the effects of a full Conqueror buff, this nerf moves the needle less for a melee champion than it does for a ranged champion. If you're in a fight for 15 seconds regardless, you know, one more auto takes you about a second for a melee champ. 2 autos takes you a second and a half for a ranged champion. So yeah, based on that logic and based on that framing, this is a bigger nerf for range than melee. If you're a ranged champion using spells, like let's say Rise or Cassiopeia, this is a much smaller nerf, right? Just getting one extra spell out is pretty quick. In fact, it's arguably faster than it is for a melee auto-attacking in a lot of cases. Not all cases, but in a lot of cases. So this could well be, I wouldn't call it a buff, but it is less of a nerf for Cassiopeia and Rise. That said, they can obviously go phase rush and stuff like that as well. So could melee champions, but you get the point. Guardian nerfed back to its original shielding values, which, to be honest, I think was kind of expected. It was a little bit hard to say. I was a little undecided, but I'm pretty sure I sided with it was going to be a buff for Guardian overall in the previous patch. No longer gives the move speed, which is, yeah, no longer gives the move speed, but it triggers more reliably. The shield was higher. It triggers on damage that's actually useful. Like, that ended up being a really big deal. So they said, hey, easy nerf, just revert the numbers because the usability buffs are worth it. Just revert the numbers. The move speed's still gone. So now comparing 10.11 to 10.13, the shield is smarter and more reliably triggers, but it doesn't give move speed. Is that a better Guardian? Seems like it. We'll see though, right? We'll see what this patch ends up doing for us. Death Dance, nerfed for ranged champions. Yeah, I mean, this item is still absolutely incredible. You could completely remove the damage storage. Legitimately, you could. And this item would still be the go-to lifesteal item on AD carries. Legitimately. Because once you're late enough in the game that you want to buy lifesteal, armor and MR are appropriate stats for you. 10 CDR is good overall. And this works on spells. Bloodthirst doesn't work on spells. I am still waiting for the season update where we get rid of the idea of lifesteal and spell vamp and just let all of your stuff heal. Just please, just do it. It's the right design for the game. It is absolutely the right call. This absolutely should be done. One day it'll happen. Death Stance is doing it right. Gunblade's doing it right. Every other item needs to catch up. Okay. Champ Select Report and Champ Select Muting, which carries over into the game. Cool beans. Bunch of bug fixes and QOL changes. Great. Pool Party skins. Cool beans. Chromos. Okay. Patch 10.13 TLDR, 58 minutes and 40 seconds in or so to the video. We've got lots of buffs and nerfs. Let's talk about them. All right, Aphelios loses about 3.5 attack damage at level 18. Doesn't always hit level 18, so yeah, call it 1.5 attack damage in mid-game. Pretty small. Worse at killing jungle monsters. A bit less R burst damage. Honestly, these nerfs seem fairly small. Probably call it a good 1.5%. It isn't that big, but like, they just love tapping Aphelios. That said, Varus needs more and doesn't have them, so Varus will probably, well, I think pros are slow to catch up to Varus. Regardless of Aphelios, I think definitely gets dropped down a peg. Every single time there have been Aphelios changes, save for one, I've been like, this will be the one. This will get him into a spot where he's going to be okay. I have been wrong every single time. People have continued to grow in learning him as a champion. They have gotten better and better. Want to point out, by the way, Death's Dance is a strict Aphelios buff because Aphelios has deflated armor and MR. And when you give a champion like that more armor and MR through Death's Dance, you compensate for the deflated stats. And that weakness is no longer weakness. Death's Dance buff with an Aphelios buff. I want to point that out. But regardless, yeah, so that was like one systems change that bumped up Aphelios. Good, solid nerfs. He will once again go back to sub 50 in solo queue. This is not a big enough nerf to make pros not look at him, but I think there were other equally good options. Cassiopeia loses 1.5% magic durability at all levels, which will be a fairly small nerf to all of her lanes. She is still well above 50% and will remain so. Gnar gets a really, this is an over 200% increase in the effectiveness of Hop's attack speed. It is worth more than double what it was before. That said, Hop's attack speed buff is only so good. It's now at a world where I would say it's decent. This is a very big buff to jungle Gnar, who is still way too weak to play. Don't do it. Top Gnar might find himself in some decent bully matchups. Cool buff. Kalista loses a pretty meaningful amount of late game attack damage. This is about 6% in the late game, especially because she doesn't really buy that much raw AD. Not until sort of later on in the game, and you'll feel this in the mid game as well. Yeah, pretty solid hit here. Yeah, I mean, not much more to say. AP Cog gets 40% stronger AP ratios on the Q and R. That is quite nice. That is a very, very nice buff. That's going to be really, really effective. It's going to be really nice. AP Cog, I think, is on the weak side. I don't know what his win rate is, though. I feel like he's on the weak side, though. I'm not expecting AP Cog to be a top pick, but I think there's a chance that we start seeing hybrid Kog'Maw, where people will go, like, Rage Blade into Nashor's Tooth, and try that kind of stuff out. I could see it. Might be good. Who knows? Nice, really, really nice buff to Lucian Q. Pass-through distance. Cool to see. Really happy about this one. This is going to be felt a lot by Lucian players, and he needed it after the last, AD carry changes left him in the dust. Nocturne gets a really substantial buff to Umbra Blades working against jungle monsters. This equates to a 50% increase in the number of Umbra Blades cast while you're fighting a camp. Now, sometimes that won't matter because you wouldn't have gotten the third one out anyway, and thus it was still only 2 Umbra Blades during the camp. And sometimes you will get 2 when you wouldn't have gotten more than 1, and it will be a double in number of Umbra Blades. Other times, you will just simply walk between camps and just have the first one again anyway. So it really depends on your ultimate clear speed, but in extended fighting, 50% more Umbra Blades means 50% more damage and 50% more healing with Umbra Blades. That is a very big deal. That is a huge clear speed buff. That is a huge clear durability buff. Nocturne is going to get a lot out of this. Nunu gets substantial bumps, about 30% in both these cases. This is 30%. This is like 28 and change percent, the bottom one. And a new AP ratio on the R shield. This is great. I think AP Nunu is probably still not a top pick, but you might see, Rod of Ages top Nunu is a possibility. It's hard to find the right AP item in jungle Nunu because you kind of want to build Roa, and building Roa second sucks. You probably don't see Leandries and stuff like that, so I'm not sure like where it would fit, what you would find. Maybe it's Zhonya's, who knows, but would be cool to see a little bit of AP splash in Nunu. I think you would honestly be able to use it. Ornn now keeps his percent health and mana when he forges health and mana while in lane. That is a big sustain hit. That is going to be felt. Rakan, his highest win rate skill build is maxing W last, but his most common skill build is maxing W first. This is a buff to Rakans who are not skilling him appropriately, which is fine. I'm a big fan of buffs to wrong skill orders. I'm a big fan of that, especially because as a support, you're not going to get a second point in your maxed last ability in most games anyway, so it's not even a buff to those players. Big fan of this change. Rakan is going to be well above 50% win rate. Very strong pick. You should max Q first, by the way. Solid champ. Rise gets 2 MR and 2 attack damage. Rise's early game is indeed very, very bad, but a buff to flat MR tends to be an all-game long buff, which is about 1.5% more durability as far as the attack damage is concerned. Yep, solid 2 AD is going to help the early landing, early trading, early last hitting, and just a little bit, right, helps Rise hold on to the early game. This is a pretty solid early game buff. It's going to feel pretty good before he's able to really just spam EQ, EQ, EQ on waves all the time. And I'm a fan. This is cool. Very low win rate champion. He's in like the 46-47% range. He's not going to hit 50 off this buff, but still good to see it. Syndra gets a 20 mana cost increase in rank 1 of the queue. That flattens out by max rank. Syndra is a sub 50% win rate champion in mid and even in bot lane, realistically. And, I mean, she's, yeah, pretty big priority pro pick. Really, really high pick rate in solo queue as well. Definitely can be fairly frustrating, but not objectively all that strong. Just, she's very specific in her strengths. Really good early wave clear. Reasonably reliable crowd control. Very reliable ultimate. She's reliable. People like reliability. People pick her a lot. Not absurdly strong, though. But yeah, this nerf's going to be felt. She's going to be, I mean, objectively, like, a bit weak, but playable. Nice buff to Vi Q. You max this first. It's absolutely correct to do so. 2 seconds off the Q cooldown at max rank is going to be quite nice. She's already pretty decent, so yeah, strong champ. The Maiden follows Yorick more reliably. Great. Yuumi gets a massive mana cost increase to her E. Here is the data table. If you didn't stack any bonus mana and you maxed E first, you can see that the E mana cost is barely different in the first 9 levels. You know, you're seeing like at most, you know, 7 mana here or there, 5 mana at level 9, right? Not a huge deal if you max E first and you're not getting bonus mana. If you are getting bonus mana, right, if you are stacking up Presence of Mind and the blue one, the ring, Presence of Mind, Mana Flow Band, there we go. It is an extremely big nerf to her mana cost, right? To the tune of almost double in some cases. Now, again, level 15 Yuumi is not realistic, but level 12 is, I think, you know, will sometimes happen in the late game. Yeah, if you are mana stacking and you manage to, like, especially if you, like, stack it early somehow, you get a really good couple of tower dives in or something, you are really going to feel this very early on. This is a direct nerf to the mana stacking build that tried to make the E cost irrelevant so that she can no longer reliably spam E in a team fight. She can cast this 6 times and nothing else, and realistically 5 times and nothing else in the very end of the game. Even if you weren't stacking mana, right, this is still a 50% mana cost increase in the theoretical end game. Very big deal. Very, very big deal. Yuumi is maybe dead. Conqueror does a bit less damage per stack, but at max stacks does just ever so slightly more damage. Overall, an objective nerf to the rune. 50% bonus stat nerf. Technically a buff at the max stacks, but no one cares. Similarly, a nerf to Guardian, which is overtuned as of last patch when they made it more reliable. 12 to 25% less shielding overall. Makes sense. Death's Dance. Yes, please nerf for ranged champions. I said it in the not TLDR, but you could remove the post-mitigation damage storing off ranged champions and you would still buy it over Bloodthirster. Death's Dance is just simply a better Bloodthirster because it gives you cooldown reduction, which is great. It gives you late game armor MR, which is generally speaking just better than raw health, especially because Phantom Dancer, by the way, also exists, and Phantom Dancer Death's Dance is what every single champion should always build if you auto attack and are ranged, so duh. Bloodthirster does not have a place in the game right now because of Phantom Dancer, because of Death's Dance. And yeah, this is the power level. This is the power level that AD carries are at. I have no idea why people are complaining that AD carries suck when you have Phantom Dancer and Death's Dance. These items are absurd. Well, that's it for the patch rundown. There's some other features, but they're not really my forte. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.